Hello everyone, and welcome back to The Thinking Cap. I'm Riya, your co-host.
And I'm Zoe, your other co-host. Today we're diving into something super foundational for everything we're going to talk about this season, which is neuroanatomy.
Yes, neuroanatomy basically refers to the structure and organization of the nervous system. That includes the brain and the spinal cord, but since this podcast focuses on neuroscience and psychology, today we'll be mostly talking about the brain.
The important one. So let's start with the big question. What even is the brain? The brain is part of your central nervous system and is often called the command center of the body. It's made up of about 60% fat, which is kind of crazy, and it's responsible for our motor control skills, how we think, our memories, emotions, and so much more.
Exactly, literally everything. And even though it feels like one big, really complicated organ, it can actually be divided into three main parts: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. These three regions work together to manage everything your brain does.
The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. It's made up of gray and white matter and controls higher level functions like reasoning, emotions, voluntary movement, homeostasis, which is basically your body trying to keep a stable internal environment, and processing sensory information.
And the cerebrum is also divided into 4 lobes, which I think is really cool when you think it from an evolutionary perspective. We have the frontal lobe, which is responsible for personality, decision-making, and movement. Then there's the parietal lobe, which helps with spatial awareness and identification, for example, of people, objects, and all things in general.
The occipital lobe handles vision, which is interesting because it's located at the back of your head, and the temporal lobe is involved in short-term memory, speech, smell, and hearing.
Moving on to the cerebellum, it's located underneath your cerebrum, even though it's smaller and plays a huge role in coordination, posture, balance, and voluntary muscle movement. So basically, if you're walking in a straight line or playing a sport
like fencing,
think your cerebellum.
The third major region is the brainstem. It connects the cerebrum and the cerebellum to the spinal cord. The brainstem itself also has 3 parts: the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla.
The midbrain helps with eye movements, motor control, and processing visual and auditory information. The pons regulates facial movement, sensation, hearing, balance, where there are many cranial nerves located there.
And the medulla is absolutely essential for survival. It connects the brain to the spinal cord and controls vital functions like breathing and swallowing. So yeah, very important. For example, I recently ate a piece of fruit and some went down the wrong pipe and my throat contracted and I thought I was choking. My friend patted me on the back and I was fine, but it was definitely an experience.
Oh, yeah, it's something we definitely want functioning at all times. Now, let's zoom in even further to neurons. Neurons are the basic functional units of the brain and nervous system. A neuron is like a text message. It receives information, it carries it down a line, delivers it to the next person in the conversation. A neuron is made up of the soma, which is the cell body, dendrites that receive the signals, an axon that sends the signals, a myelin sheath that insulates the axon, and axon terminals that pass the signal on to the next cell.
And that communication between neurons is what allows you to think, move, feel emotions, literally everything we experience.
The brain is also protected by 3 layers called the meninges. From outer to inner, there are the dura mater, the arachnoid matter, and the pia mater.
I always remember dura mater because durable and it's the tough outer layer.
Wait, I love that. That's actually such a good way to remember it.
The brain also has a super important blood supply. It receives blood from the vertebral arteries and carotid arteries, which deliver oxygen and nutrients that the brain needs to function properly.
Now, let's talk about some specific structures inside the brain that are really relevant to psychology and mental health.
Yep. First, the hypothalamus. This structure is responsible for maintaining homeostasis, so things like hunger, thirst, body temperature, circadian rhythms, and even memory and emotion. It sends chemical signals throughout the body, so as our bodies grow and develop, the hypothalamus is responsible for most of the hormonal changes that occur with growing up.
The hypothalamus also works closely with the pituitary gland, which is sometimes called the master gland of the endocrine system. The pituitary gland regulates hormone flow and receives signals from the hypothalamus.
And then we have the amygdala. which plays a major role in emotion, memory, reward processing, and sympathetic responses like fight or flight. And the hippocampus is crucial for learning, memory formation, spatial awareness, and navigation. It receives information from the cerebral cortex and helps convert short-term memories into long-term ones.
When we talk about mental health later in this podcast, you'll probably hear us reference the amygdala and hippocampus a lot, because these structures are very deeply connected to how we process these emotions and experiences, especially from a young age and as we grow up to be adults.
Exactly. Understanding the physical structure of the brain helps us understand why we feel the way we feel, which is kind of the whole point of this podcast.
And we hope this episode gave you a foundational understanding of neuroanatomy that will make future episodes even more interesting and meaningful.
Thank you so much for tuning in to our second episode of The Thinking Cap. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify, YouTube, and Instagram. And as always,
keep your thinking cap on.
Bye! See you all next time!